Hello, my friends. Okay, so I don't know if you guys remember. Recently, I was talking about what constitutes a hit, or yes, and not so much exactly how many dollars you made in actual dollars, but in how profitable your movie is. So I was talking about how movies like The Blair Witch Project and I'm trying to think of another one that I cited last time. But the Blair Witch Project is a good example. Something that was made for way under $100,000. Um, oh, El Mariachi, yeah, that was it. And made millions. Or Sweetback, I think was made for like 50,000, 100,000. No, I wasn't made that cheap. It was made for well under a million, and it made 10 million at the box office. So those are insanely profitable films by any metric. Um, so what if a movie costs 75 million, which in the era of the blockbusters, especially the ones affiliated with Marvel, um, that's kind of low. The first X-Men movie in 2000, year 2000, shot in 1999 for 75 million, and that was considered a very low budget movie then for that kind of movie. And it had almost a record number of effect shots in the film. CGI wasn't as advanced as it is now. A few shots are a little dodgy, but overall the effects were pretty groundbreaking. And the movie itself was good. It was solid. It had a different vibe than the later X-Men movies or the Avengers movies. So it didn't really matter that But anyway, it made I think it made 150 million or in its first run domestically. So that's a profitable movie. Now, obviously, we factor in the worldwide gross; it was very profitable. um, so let's talk about this Morbius film. So Morbius in the year 2020, I guess it was made in 2020. Um, so that's 21 years later, was made for 75 million. So I guess that's considered really a low budget movie. Um, it also had a lot of effect shots, a lot of CGI, and some of them are a little dodgy. Not gonna lie, um, especially in the third act, where things are like rushing towards you and breaking through walls and everything, which isn't that much different than the third act of a lot of the contemporary MCU movies. And in some of those films, for instance, even the Great Black Panther, uh, some of the effect shots during the climactic battle between T'Challa and M'Baku, oh, not M'Baku, N'Jadaka, Eric Killmonger, were pretty kind of slack. And some of those riding the rhinoceros scenes were a little slack. This one has several slack shots. Luckily, it goes by very fast. This one meaning Morbius. So I saw this the other night, and I wanted to tell you guys, get something. Okay. Daniel Espinosa directed this. I have no idea who he is. I have not researched. But I wanted to get the director's name right. I knew these were all people that were unfamiliar with me, to me, except for Avi Arad, one of the producers, who was one of the major producers of the first several Marvel films that were made by other studios, farmed out to other studios. So he helped produce Blade and the X-Men films, and especially the Spider-Man films. Spider-Man was his baby. So I don't know. I'm not sure if he's been affiliated with the Amazing Spider-Man reboot. I don't think he's been affiliated with the home films with Tom Holland of Spider-Man. But I guess he's still affiliated with Sony and the Spider-Man franchise, which they kind of half own half rights to. So you guys probably know the story by now. Disney for some odd reason won't buy the Marvel rights wholesale. It's not that they don't have the money. I read an article about it recently, and it was really confusing, and really didn't answer the question why won't they buy it. And the verdict was So yeah, they don't need to buy it. But there was really no reason given why. I was just like, yeah. So, Sony makes half the money, Disney makes half the money. So, like, Disney basically packages the MCU Spider-Man movies, you know, makes, puts them together, brings the talent together. And then Sony has distribution. I don't know how they divide all those millions and billions of dollars. Um, what this has done, though, is that Sony has Spider-Man affiliated properties that it retains the rights to. And these are films that they're just going to put out regardless. And their model seems to be focusing on Spider-Man's villains. Because, to me, the Spider-Verse is kind of a weak concept. And I've gone on record before as saying that I have this heretical view. I did not really enjoy Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Animation was great. Wasn't really my favorite style. Not that I really have a favorite style. I know some people favor certain styles like old school or like anime, kind of the dominant to what you associate with anime these days, which anime really all it means is a Japanese cartoon. But there's that vibe. So it didn't really have an anime vibe to me. It did have a lot of the kind of post-anime cartooning, not really striving for any kind of realism in the figures or the representation of the characters, which is fine because a movie with characters like Peter Porker, Spider Pig, you really don't need that. It actually had a variety of visual styles. And that was what was cool about it. But I didn't like the characters. I didn't like the story. It just wasn't my Spider-Man. It wasn't my thing. No, I'm not a racist, but Miles Morales is just not to me Spider-Man. I don't really like his character very much. I don't feel like. I mean, yeah. It's just I don't feel it. I don't feel Miles Morales. I mean, I have some other friends around my age, um, some black, some white, who love Miles Morales, and then I know quite a few people younger than me, some a lot younger than me, that work at my workplace, who just really adore Miles Morales. They seem to like Tom Holland Spider Man pretty well. To them, the Tobey Maguire Spider Man is like ancient, you know. It's back when us old fogies, watched movies back when we were young, way back in 2002, 20 years ago. So 20 years ago seemed like a long time to me when I was that age. It doesn't seem that long to me now. I don't know if that's my age or if time is actually becoming more finite. I mean, it's moving faster, accelerating faster, as some quantum physicists have speculated. It certainly feels that way, that we're accelerating towards, total entropy. So, what the hell does all this have to do with the movie review? Okay, so my point is that Sony is just trying to make money off the back of the Spider-Man concept, the Spider-Verse, thing with all the associated Spider-Man characters. And it seems like their big idea to do this mainly is to do movies about Spider-Man's villains. Like they wanted to do a Sinister Six movie for years here. And I'm like, why? Who are they going to fight? Are they going to be the heroes? I mean, and as we found out in Spider-Man No Way Home, the MCU has realized that, Marvel Studios, the MCU has realized that they cannot better Sam Raimi's Spider-Man films in a lot of ways, and one way was the villains. They're not going to be able to do a Green Goblin that rises to the level of Willem Dafoe. They're certainly not going to do a Dr. Octopus that can get up to that iconic level that Alfred Molina has. And so they played those characters in Spider-Man No Way Home. So you don't know if in the MCU, if those characters exist. No mention has been made of the Osborns in the MCU. But the MCU is weird. Spider-Man is weird. I mean, Ned Leeds is called Ned Leeds, but he's actually based on one of the best friends of Spider-Man from the Ultimate Spider-Man, an Asian kid. Now, it could be the best friend of Miles Morales, but it might be the Ultimate. I know he originated in the Ultimate Universe. Yeah, but I can't remember which one. Probably not important. But anyway, so he's a conflation of characters. Uh, so MJ, we find out in No Way Home that one of her parents was named Watson, and she disavows that name, even though her legal name is Michelle Jones Watson, or MJ. So uh, yes, and then of course there's an MJ, Mary Jane Watson, that Spider-Man, played by Tobey Maguire, in his universe. He, I mean, he kind of hints broadly that he still loves her. I'm not sure if they're still together or they're married. I would hope by that time they'd be married in that universe. Um, so Sony's idea is kind of stupid in my opinion. So they've done two Venom movies, and like the two Deadpool movies, it's a character that came as I was leaving Marvel behind. For several years, I left behind Marvel. I left behind shortly, a couple of years later, I left behind DC. I'd already left DC behind, really, but I was still collecting the Vertigo books. By 1995, I wasn't collecting any uh, comics by the big duopoly. They're kind of like Democrats and Republicans of comics, Marvel and DC. Don't ask me which one is which; it's irrelevant, or maybe not to me. It's irrelevant to me. Um, by 1996 and seven, I was writing a comic book orientated column for this regional zine called Indie File, which originated here in Charlotte, the creation of one Samir Shukla, who ran Milestone Records. It's a great record shop from back in the day. And he had some stake at one point in the Milestone Club, which is still in existence and is a pretty worldwide legendary punk club. A lot of now famous people played there when they were really young and raw, and you got to see them in this little tiny room. I mean, not much bigger than my living room. But let me not go too far off track. So, for Indie File, I was writing a comic book column, and I didn't review any Marvel or DC comics. And I even wrote kind of a little thesis that was kind of anti-Marvel. And I gave a copy to Roy Thomas, who I interviewed him for one issue of it. I interviewed Neil Gaiman for another issue of it. And then I gave Roy Thomas the issue with his interview, and also the issue with the introductory column that was kind of slamming Marvel. That wasn't slamming the era where he was the editor-in-chief. It was just the contemporary Marvel. But I did kind of jab at Stan Lee a little bit for maybe being overrated. So he probably didn't like that. But we stayed friendly after that. So my point is, I'd left Marvel behind by the mid '90s, but around that time, this new generation of characters was rising. Like Rob Liefeld had created characters that are now considered iconic. I still almost consider them new characters. Again, I'm showing my age, but of course, I mean Deadpool and Cable, and they've kind of transcended all that. So I didn't think I would like the Deadpool films. I actually enjoyed them quite a bit, and I actually felt like the second film, where you get in the X-Force characters and like Shatterstar and Domino, I felt like they were kind of good-naturedly poking fun at the excess of the McFarlane, Liefeld, Jim Valentino, etc. era of Marvel. And of course, all those guys split off and formed Image Comics, which is still existing and going strong. But there was that particular art style that came to the fore at the beginning of the '90s that I don't like it. And I don't really like the stories. But there were some memorable characters created by McFarlane, Liefeld, etc. And Cable, for Image, like Spawn. That's a memorable character, an interesting concept, But for Marvel, Liefeld had created those characters for the X books. So for the Spider-Man books, McFarlane's big, legacy was, he co-created these characters, Venom and Carnage, because in recent years, the guy who scripted the Venom early appearances was David Michelinie, and he's kind of come out on Facebook within the last year or two and been like, hey, I created or co-created that guy. I think, yeah, that's correct. Now, Fabian Nicieza scripted some of those early Liefeld ones. I don't know if I have not read of him coming forward and claiming as big a stake, but he certainly may or may not deserve a co-creator credit. I don't know. Another debate for another time. I have other videos where I talk about that kind of stuff. One's called "What Does a Comic Book Creator Actually Do?" So you can look that up on here and watch it, hopefully. Oh, by the way, please leave a like. Please, please, please leave a like. It boosts me in the algorithms. Otherwise, I get even more lost. So my point is, yes, Venom and Carnage. Venom, of course, is a spin-off of the Spider-Man symbiote costume, which was created in the mid-'80s, I think, by Jim Shooter for the Secret Wars, first Secret Wars series. It was a dark age, it really was, for comics. I mean, there were a few, shiny spots like Frank Miller, but overall, Marvel was kind of, but I was still collecting madly then. It took me a few years to really kind of shake that zombie-like hold it had on me. So I liked the Venom, like the Deadpool movies. I liked the Venom movies a lot better than I thought I would. I liked the second one a little bit better. And Tom Hardy's done a good job as that character. But for what they are, is what I'm saying. I don't love the character. I don't love the Deadpool character. Even in the movies, I don't love those movies. I like them. I enjoy them. I'm not in a rush to add them to the Blu-ray library you see back here, and I may never. Though I have some friends who have, and that's all good. So yeah, so they went with Venom as like the first one. We're gonna make a super villain of Spider-Man's, give his own movie, and have him be the hero, anti-hero. Now Venom started squarely as a villain, and later kind of did get his own book due to super popularity, several books and spin-offs and alternate versions like Marvel's obsessed with, and became kind of an anti-hero. Well, so the second one that they actually got to the developmental stage and finally got filmed was Morbius. Now, Morbius is an old school character from the early 70s, the early 1970s, and he was created by the aforementioned Roy Thomas, along with his artist of choice in that period, Gil Kane, for Amazing Spider-Man number 101. So now Morbius had a career as a villain, yes, of Spider-Man, but he had a much more lengthy and, to me, interesting and legit career as an anti-hero. He had his own book in a comic book called Adventure into Fear, which that series spun out of his appearances in Spider-Man, fighting Spider-Man, and in Marvel Team Up fighting Spider-Man alongside the Human Torch and the X-Men, the original X-Men. As a matter of fact, the Adventure to Fear first appearance of Morbius, Fear number 20, gives us kind of a fill-in flashback and shows, when Morbius was being held and detained at the X Mansion in Westchester by Professor Xavier and Cyclops and Jean Grey. And Paul Gulacy did the art on that first issue, and his rendition of Morbius is awesome as hell. His rendition of X-Men is really excellent as well. That's kind of a little lost X-Men little story that I recommend to X-Men completists. But it's also a great Morbius story, and it started a 12-issue cycle series in Fear. I have most of them. I've read all of them. I own most of them. Some I have owned since I was a kid during that period. I took to Morbius right away for whatever reason as a kid, and he was very tortured and tormented, and I don't know. I just dug the guy. I loved his look. Everything about him I thought was incredible. And when I interviewed Roy Thomas in 1997, I asked about Morbius, and we talked in detail. So, Morbius is named after the character Morbius in Forbidden Planet from 1956, classic science fiction film. And Roy said he was patterned after a character. Well, his origin was patterned after the origin of a vampire found in a film. I think it's a Mexican film, maybe, called The Vampire, just The Vampire from the late 50s. Now, at the time he was telling me this, I was very confused and thought he meant the movie Atom Age Vampire from the same period. He corrected me, but then I corrected him. But I was wrong. He was right. There later, I later saw The Vampire, memorable. which did have the more scientific origin of vampirism in the lead character. So, back then radiation was kind of the origin du jour, so it involved radiation. And Michael Morbius was a brilliant Nobel Peace Prize winning scientist and expert on, blood diseases and things of that nature. But he himself had an incurable blood disease. He was a very weak, moribund character. He even looked kind of morbid. And he comments in his first appearance, well, in his origin flashback, that he was ugly and hideous. He already had kind of the snout-like nose and everything, kind of like a bat. And he mused how people laughed behind his back at him and his girlfriend Martine Bancroft because she was beautiful and why was she with this guy? And Martine, of course, was totally loyal to Michael. Now, Michael also had a best friend named Nikos, an obviously Greek guy, and later they did establish conclusively that Michael Morbius himself was Greek. And basically, he's trying to cure himself of this blood disease, and even he can't lick this, even though it's like his forte. So he tries this experimental thing with radiation, and I believe he takes blood from vampire bats, or I was gonna say DNA, but they didn't really use DNA in stories back then. But same central idea, the essence of vampire bats, because there was something in their blood that was able to combat this, thing that was in his blood. My brain is going blank on the scientific nomenclature there. So he became, as a result of this experiment, it kind of, cured him of his blood disease, but he became a living vampire. They called him Morbius, the living vampire, because he wasn't dead or undead like Dracula, etc. He wasn't susceptible to all of the vampiric things that could kill or harm vampires, like sunlight or a stake through the heart. Well, a stake through the heart would kill anybody, vampire otherwise, right? And crosses, religious iconography, and none of that stuff. He didn't sleep in a coffin. No, he did sleep generally during the day and go out at night, and he was hungering for blood. Now, he was very tormented. So in his origin, when he comes out of the chamber where he did this experiment, he jumps on Nikos and he kills him. Nikos dies. He doesn't come back as a vampire. That's another thing that was different, we thought then about Morbius's affliction, his form of vampirism. And so he's sad. He had a very tragic origin. It was very sad. Michael Morbius was a very uncharacteristically sensitive and kind, meek kind of character for that period. And I'm almost a dandy, kind of very, like, he cries and hugs Nikos' dead body and tells him he loves him. And of course, this is the early 70s, I'm sure some of the homophobic readers are like, what the hell? Why is he showing this kind of unmanly affection? But this wasn't Spider-Man's comic. So they were used to a non-traditional hero who was like over-emotional, I would think. But Morbius was like Spider-Man to the nth degree, He was kind of like a goth, Spider-Man. So, and then, he avoided Martine, so he wouldn't vampirize her. He killed everybody aboard the ship. This was conducted on a ship that he requested to be chartered in international waters so that he could get away with whatever legally. And he put most of his money into it. It was kind of like a big yacht. And so he killed all of the people on the boat who were just kind of these, ne'er-do-wells and scallywags. They use archaic slang here. But then, like Dracula. Like when Dracula makes the trip from Transylvania to London, to Carfax Abbey, the ship comes in and everyone's dead and there's rats in the hold. So the homage to that. After that, he tries to kill himself. He jumps into the water and tries to drown, but almost drowns. But his self-preservation instinct is too strong, and so he basically has to keep grappling with this bloodlust. So his general disposition and attitude and predilection toward attacking people to bite them, brought him into conflict with Spider-Man and as a antagonist. Um, but like I said, he eventually got his own book, and what distinguished him in his own comic book, in Fear, was that the storyline he was in had some supernatural elements, uh, which were weird for him because he was a scientifically created vampire. But it also had some far out science fiction concepts, which were kind of seemingly incongruous with the fact it was a vampire. So this merger kind of horror and sci-fi made his adventures interesting, and the majority of them were written by my favorite, Steve Gerber, of course. Gerber had his hand in almost everything awesome in the Marvel in the 70s at one time or another. So his take on things was cool. And one of the key early issues, he is found by Blade, the Vampire Slayer. That's when he was called Blade, the Vampire Slayer. Before Buffy made it where you can't use Vampire Slayer for Blade. Damn it. Trademark law. So, and Blade's like, I'm going to stake this motherfucker, and he didn't say that. He didn't say that in the comics, but he did kind of act that way. He kind of had that attitude, kind of like Wesley Snipes in the movie. I think he did say, I'm going to stake that motherfucker a few times. And, but, Morbius thought he was insane. He was like, this guy's crazy. He believes I'm a real vampire. He thinks they're real vampires. So Morbius himself actually thought it was amusing that this guy believed in this supernatural shit. In a couple issues, though, Morbius is like gone to another planet. He goes to a planet orbiting the star Arcturus, and he hangs out with this dude whose head is like one big eyeball. P. Craig Russell did some of the art in this. Just great art. I mean, he did a lot of those issues. So Paul Gulacy, P. Craig Russell, and then Frank Robbins, who of course is very different than those guys, and probably hated by a lot of fans of those artists. But I thought he's an incredibly distinctive artist, famous for drawing the Invaders that Roy Thomas wrote for Marvel. But he had runs on other books like Captain America. But his Morbius, his cartooning is very extreme. A lot of people don't like it, but I thought he did a good job. It was different, but that was cool, So, and Morbius' series ends, and what has happened at the end of his series is that, towards the end, is that he's being hunted by this this cop. I think I'm pretty sure he's a cop. Yeah, called Simon Stroud. And Simon Stroud, is a little incredulous about the whole thing about Morbius at first too, but then he realizes, okay, yeah, he's not a real vampire. Now, of course, in the same universe, Dracula and real vampires did exist, but and surely after he's run into Blade, well, he thought Blade was crazy, so I guess he didn't believe that. But Simon Stroud discovers that there are people Morbius has bitten that didn't die. Like, most of them died, but some of them came back as vampires. The problem is they had that radioactivity flowing through their blood that Morbius, when they bite somebody, they inject an enzyme to you as they draw your blood, which makes you into a vampire, that enzyme. So in his case, when he plants the enzyme in you, when he bites you and takes your blood, he had that radioactivity, and so the same transformation occurred in some of his victims, not many, but one, unfortunately, was Martine, his great love. So they cure her at the end of the series, and Simon Stroud by this time realizes that Morbius, he ain't a bad guy, but Morbius, flies away into the night because his series got canceled. So they had to wrap it up. Okay, so this period that I'm talking about, if you just throw Spider-Man and Blade out of the equation, is the foundation of what they based this film Morbius on. And it is a very, very accurate, straight adaptation of that whole through line of plots. There's only one major change, and there's only one minor change, and I'll get into those in a minute here. So this movie stars Jared Leto, and a lot of people are kind of indifferent with him. I like him depending on the movie. It depends on the director. Like, I hated him as the Joker. But then I'm not really fond of most of Zack Snyder's material anyway. But I really did hate him as the Joker. The Joker as a juggalo, I'm sure on paper, sounded funny to these people. Yeah, millennials will dig this twist, you know. And I'm not a millennial, but I don't know any millennials that did dig it. So I'm sure some did. Probably some old fogies like me dug it, but I thought it was pathetic. So it was executed poorly. It was a gimmicky idea. It didn't have any legs. It didn't have anything to sustain it beyond that. Hey, what if the Joker was like a juggalo, like insane clown posse? Yeah, what if? Okay, toss that. That's where you need editors and producers who have brains who say not every idea is great. Like when Marvel made Spider-Man a Nazi and retroactively made him having been a Nazi since 1940. That's an idea that the editor should have shot down, you know, with a fucking machine gun, you know, AK-47 to that thing. Now, of course, there was reasons in story for it, but the problem is when they launched that arc, this idiotic editor Tom Brevoort, who I'm not obviously not fond of, and the idiotic writer Nick Spencer, they swore up and down to all the media, not just the comic media, because this attracted the bigger media, because Captain America by this time, you know, was a character who starred in his own films. He was known by everyone as a hero and as a Nazi fighting hero too. But they swore he's always been a Nazi. Yeah, we retconned it, but yeah, not only is he a Nazi now present and working with Hydra, you know, who are kind of like continuation of the Nazi thing, via Baron Strucker and all this kind of stuff. And in the movie, Red Skull had Hydra in World War II, and Arm Zola and et cetera continued Hydra all the way in the present to where they totally corrupted S.H.I.E.L.D. in the Captain America the Winter Soldier film. You guys know all that, I'm sure. Well, yeah, they swore no, Captain America's always been a Nazi. They showed flashbacks of his mom and him in the late 1920s, and him like going to a Hydra meeting, or his mom going to a Hydra like Nazi like meeting, and I don't know, turning over her son. I don't know, pledging her son to Hydra. I don't remember. I mean, it's trash, and it's trash because, I mean, in its own context, it could have been just an interesting like alternate story, or you know, reality had been shifted by the cosmic cube, and we all know about the cosmic cube. It was called the Tesseract in the movies, and the Red Skull wielded it during World War II, which is how the dead Red Skull became the keeper of the Soul Stone in the Avengers Endgame and Infinity War. Um, so yeah, but no, they had to do that as a gimmick for attention. Had to say, "Yep, sorry guys, he's always been a Nazi." So it's offended everyone, including myself, obviously, and Chris Evans, who played Captain America, as he expressed on Twitter. That wasn't a great idea. Um, so anyway, not all ideas are created equal. So with Morbius, the film Morbius, yes, Jared Leto as the Joker was terrible, but Jared Leto as Morbius, I think, is really good. Visually, he's perfect. He had naturally long black hair, and naturally the well, you know, Morbius had a big goatee, but he didn't have a mustache. He just had a goatee. He was one of the only characters back then that had a goatee, and some artists just drew it like this black little lump of ink. So I didn't even realize. At first, I thought it was shading, and then I'm like, why it's always on his chin? Because they didn't try to make it look like hair or of any texture of hair that I'd ever seen. They did the same thing with Blade, ironically enough. Though some of the Blade stuff you could kind of tell quicker because the rendering of Gene Colan and Tom Palmer made it a little more obvious. Actually, Tom Palmer obfuscated Colan's drawing to where it did kind of sometimes look like a blot of ink on Blade's chin too. He's a great inker, but you know, I'm just saying. Uh, Obviously, so Blade and Morbius were the only two characters that I'm aware of in Marvel. There weren't villains anyway that had goatees, and neither had mustaches. Occasionally, Blade would be kind of shown some sort of mustache. So they were radical, and then they met each other. I mean, they could have formed a band or something, been kind of hip. And Morbius did have long black hair in the comics. Jared Leto is too like pretty though to be Morbius, so they kind of didn't mention that he was like hideously ugly, or he thought he was hideously ugly, or he had a nose like a vampire All of that comes as part of the transformation. Whereas in the comics, he always kind of looked that way, but the transformation accentuated and exaggerated it. In this one, it's kind of like the game face in Buffy the Vampire Slayer shows, to where when they're in their vampire mode, like bloodlusting mode, their face turns all demonic. They use the game face in this movie. So essentially, the classic Morbius full out look is in the movie, perfectly rendered, great makeup, and some CGI. But it's like his game face. It's when he's in that mode. And they don't overuse it, I think, and it's smooth. However, there's another character who becomes a vampire who they really overuse it, and sometimes it's not so great looking. And I'll get to that in a sec. So, but there's some great touches. They did the same thing they did in the first Captain America movie, where Steve Rogers as this emaciated kid, and then he's pumped up with a super soldier formula. Now the emaciated Steve was CGI. The pumped up Steve was Chris Evans after getting pumped up in real life. Same thing here. As Morbius, he gets stronger and more muscular, and they did this with the first Spider-Man film too. But this one is the most pronounced, though, of all three of those. I mean, he was really emaciated, sickly looking, and they really have some scenes with his shirt off that are really detailed, and it really made it look very real and gross. He's never been well. So in the movie, he's had this disease his whole life. And so he's handicapped. He walks with, two metal crutches with each hand. His legs aren't very good. And he's very weak. And he's kind of spindly and he's kind of dizzy, acts kind of, like he's going to faint every 5 seconds. But he still does become the brilliant scientist, specializes in blood disease. He does win the Nobel Prize, and he does come up with this cure involving bat DNA, albeit minus the radiation element, just like they did with Raimi's Spider-Man. They just got it into altered DNA and took the radiation element out. It's kind of a dated, unnecessary device for the origin. So he goes to the experiment. Now he's on a boat in international waters, and he mentions how it costs a lot of money. And in this movie, he has kind of a semi-patron. In the beginning, they have a flashback of these kids in this kind of orphanage-like place who are really sick, and one of them's Michael, and one of them is this kid named Lucian, and Michael nicknames him Milo. So that sticks. Milo's rich, Michael's not, but they become like best buddies. Michael kind of takes care of Milo, and vice versa. They help each other out. So in adulthood, they're still good friends. So that's the major change, is that the Milo character is in the forefront of the origin. I'll get more on that. He's played by Matt Smith, who was one of the Doctor Who's. So yes, the experiment takes place on the boat. Now in this one, Martine Bancroft, instead of being just like his girlfriend, Martine Bancroft is a doctor. So they give her, agency as a full woman too, as they've done with a lot of these updated versions, and good reason. Like Jean Grey, they made a doctor. Jane Foster, they changed her from a nurse to a doctor, albeit like an astrophysicist doctor. So this is the same kind of thing. So she's not like, and same with Betty Ross in the Hulk by Ang Lee, was turned into a scientist working alongside Bruce Banner instead of just the daughter of the general, love interest. So this is kind of like the Hulk thing. Yeah, they're experimenting, but she's not working directly on his cure. But she is aware of it. She does know he's taking a risk. They are not in a romance, but they're clear they've been good friends for many years. And him and Milo are talking at one point. And Milo hobbles around with a cane. He walks a little better than Michael, but he seems actually slightly sicklier overall. Both of them are not expected to live a very long life with this disease. But Milo jokes with him about hooking up with Martine, basically, that he finds Martine attractive. I mean, Milo does, and him and Morbius should, buddy talk, and Morbius is like, nah, he doesn't say this, but it's like, we're just friends, co-worker, colleagues, it's all good, it's all professional. So she's on the boat when he does the experiment in the film, and it does go awry, and Morbius comes out of the chamber. Now, there's no Nikos there. He comes out of the chamber, and attacks all of these scallywags I mentioned. In this one, they're mercenaries. They kind of hint like they're these Blackwater kind of, scumbags. I mean, they several times talk about how they're scumbags, which I thought was great because, our government loves to fund and arm and hire mercenaries, at least since the Iraq War, and they're still doing it. And of course, a lot of us on the left, think they're kind of scumbags anyway. And I like the fact this movie took that stance on them. I don't know how they're going to be portrayed in the Moon Knight series, where Mark Spector used to be one. So he kills all of them. I think there's 8 of them. Drinks all their blood. So then he kind of snaps out of it and he jumps in the water. And they don't say he tries to kill himself, but basically he does resurface, later on. Pardon the pun. Martine gets knocked out by one of the mercenaries. And so she's in the hospital, the concussion, and the police are trying to question her and figure out what the hell, why is she the only survivor? Where the hell, what happened to Michael Morbius? And the cop in charge of this is named Simon Stroud. The only major change with this is that he went from a blonde white guy to a black guy with a shaved head, played by Tyrese Gibson, who does a really good job. I really liked him. Now, he has a partner, I believe, named Rodriguez. I forgot the name of the actor. Comic relief. He's the only real attempt at comic relief in the movie, but what's beautiful about it is all of his jokes fall short, and you can tell that the Simon Stroud character thinks they're cheesy. And so they don't try to not, elbow you in the ribs, the audience, like this is supposed to be funny, man. It's like, no, it's kind of like, I'm embarrassed to know this motherfucker. That's like the Simon Stroud. But he doesn't quite get egregious to where you just want to punch his face in. He's not quite that kind of character, but he dances on the edge a few times. He's filling that. They seem like they always have to have a character of that nature in movies, big mainstream movies. So Stroud and his buddy are investigating Morbius, and they eventually find him, and Morbius is kind of pretending to still be using the crutches and whatever. Now, Morbius has been doing this, scientific journal reporting his findings and how his experiment went. And they use that as exposition. So he talks about how he's changed physically. He's become much stronger. He's got like a sonar that's kind of like Daredevil's radar sense. He's got increased hearing. And his agility is incredible. He's fast. And then later you find out he can kind of fly. He can jump really high, but he also kind of glide around too. So all of those powers, pretty much, for the most part, were exactly from the comic book. I mean, they're all portrayed exactly the same way, et cetera, but, it hits Morbius. He's a living vampire. He's got these abilities because of this fucking experiment, and his blood thing's cured. Now, they added this twist in that, which isn't in the comics. I mean, in the comics, he needs blood. And that's the problem. He just needs blood. In this movie, to survive. In this movie, he needs blood or the disease will come back. So if he doesn't get enough blood, he will start to become emaciated and crippled again. And then die, of course. So he uses this synthetic blood, which he himself developed. And Simon Stroud mentions that an injection of it saved his own, Simon Stroud's, life in the Iraq War. And that was pretty cool. I thought a good touch. He's got a bunch of it, but it's finite. So he can survive off it for a while. And as time goes on, the time frame in which it has efficacy becomes shorter and shorter. Like it's 8 hours and 6 hours and like 4.5 hours. And he knows when that's over, he's going to have to feast again on humans like he did the first time on the scallywags. So he doesn't want Martine to get too close to him, but she is helping him try to figure out what the fuck to do about all this. In the interim, Milo has discovered what's happened, and he's begging Michael to do it to him so he can be cured. And his acting's really good here, and their bond is really good. It's a little better acted by Matt Smith than it is Jared Leto, but they do kind of, counteract or balance out each other. But Matt Smith is really affecting as this kind of pathetic, dying rich guy who just, he's like, I've given you money, I've helped you, and to do this, and I deserve this. And Michael's like, no, because you'll become a vampire, et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't say vampire at that point, but um, then a nurse is killed in the hospital, and of course Michael's immediately suspected, and that's when Simon Stroud realizes that Morbius is around, and that Morbius, after they talk about his blood saving his life, that Stroud and his buddy realize that he's faking and that he's actually really strong, and then he can jump around and fly away and whatever. He is arrested though finally, and he goes with them, and he wonders if he blacked out and sucked the nurse's blood. At first I thought that was the case, right? But then I realized I started to kind of catch on. And what really happened is that off screen, off camera, Milo, I guess, sneaked into his lab or whatever and strapped himself in. I don't know, and did the procedure. I'm not sure. I mean, I guess Morbius kind of had it semi set up there to try to cure himself. I don't know. Somehow Milo gets the exact same condition, except he likes drinking human blood. He's not into the synthetic stuff. He's like, I don't want that fake stuff. He basically says, I don't want that fake shit. And he gets off on it, and he grows completely addicted and dependent upon it. He loves the powers. He does the game face thing all the time and looks demonic. He's kind of a dick. He's kind of a misogynist, kind of like preying on women. I mean, they kind of imply that he hasn't really had much sex because of his condition, and women aren't into him that much, even though he's rich. One woman he kind of has his eye on is Martine, of course. Martinez, I can't remember the actress's name. She's Hispanic. I wasn't familiar with her. She's great. I liked her look, and I liked them going from a typical blonde contrast to Morbius to going with a Hispanic contrast to Morbius in this one. And she knows Spanish fluently. They worked that into one of the scenes. She was great. Her character was perfectly pitched, perfectly performed, not cheesy. They didn't use any cheesy romantic cliches, or this movie really eschews like stupid plot points. And like I said, needless, stupid quips and one-liners. Even with the Rodriguez guy, they kind of cut it short. It's clipped. And Morbius himself makes a few wisecracks, which it's obvious they're kind of trying to go a little for the MCU, funny quip vibe, but they don't. The timing's different. Like in the MCU, they do that quip thing and then they hold on the camera like several beats. And that's when you're supposed to be funny. Like that's when the other characters react, and that's supposed to be haha. This one they don't hold on the beats as long, so it's kind of like, oh, okay, yeah, funny or not funny, you can just move on. Michael was trying to be funny. Rodriguez is kind of a dork. You kind of don't need to linger on it and draw too much attention to itself, and that's really different than a lot of these kind of movies. I mean, if this movie were made in like 80s or 90s, Milo the vampire would be making all kinds of insane, ridiculous comments. He'd be fighting Bruce Willis or something. And he does make some of those kind of comments and have that swagger, and it does almost get ridiculous at times, I will admit. But they just pull back to me at the right points. Because this guy is kind of a dork. I mean, he hasn't enjoyed this hedonistic life. And now, so his kind of swagger is like, yeah, man, I can walk now. I'm strong. I can get women, and he's reveling in the power. So that's the big kind of major change, is his figure being so important within the origin and being in his life, Morbius's life. Now, I'll be honest with you, I do not know if this Lucian/Milo character exists in the comics. I did not research it. But if he did, he plays no part in the origin or early stories of Morbius that I summed up like a half hour ago. So that's a major change. Now, here's the minor change. So Jared Harris plays the character named Nicholas. I'm going to assume it's with a K, like the Nicholas who's on General Hospital, a Greek, rendering of Nicholas. And he is kind of the paternal figure for Michael and for Lucian/Milo. And he's Greek, and he's their buddy. Jared Harris is really good. I hadn't seen him in a movie in a long time. You know, he's aged a lot, but so have we all. But in the '90s, I enjoyed his performances in Naja, one of my favorites, which I've reviewed on this channel. And I shot Andy Warhol. He was Andy Warhol, which I haven't reviewed on this channel. So Nicholas is basically Nikos. You know, they just made his name a little more, accessible or whatever. You know, a little more mainstream sounding. But it's the same character essentially. But instead of being the best, slightly older best friend of Morbius that he loves dearly, they've kind of shifted the love dearly over to Milo, and Nicholas is kind of like more like a mentor, kind of buddy, a confidant, and they do kill him off, but Morbius isn't the one who kills him off. He's killed off by Milo when Nicholas discovers what Milo is, and that's really the big scenes with Nicholas are really mainly in the beginning where we see them in Greece in the early days, and then in the modern day when Milo goes to him. No, or he goes to Milo, whatever, and then Milo's like, "Yeah, fuck you," and he slashes his throat and his stomach and bleeding out. And Michael finds him, and it's like the dying scene. But they don't drag it out too hokey, to hokey extremes. They know when to pull back. I liked that a lot before things get too cliche. Not everyone will agree with me, but everyone may have a different sense of timing in these humorous beats or these melodramatic kind of scenes than I do. But I've seen so many of both that I think I know what I'm talking about. But as some people say on the internet, your mileage may vary. YMMV. And when I first saw that, I was like, "What the fuck is YMMV?" Your mileage may vary. Oh, you disagree with me? Whatever. So of course, all this leads up to Milo trying to kill Martine. As a sexual thing, but he's going to draw blood. And Michael finding and bringing to justice, stopping Milo. He feels responsible for him, obviously. So that's the conflict. So I was glad there they didn't try to take some other villain from some other Morbius storyline. They made it endemic within the actual origin. I mean, in a way, that is obvious. The opposite number, usually it's like father and son, or mentor and mentee, and that happens in a lot of these kind of movies, like Batman 1989, and then first Iron Man and Spider-Man 2002. A lot of that dynamic. So this dynamic was more like the best friends dynamic, like the brothers, kind of like Thor and Loki, but so yeah, uh, Morbius, yeah, he's pretty cool. I really like the effects are really over the top at times, and sometimes CGI. I'm bringing that up because there's going to be the big battle between him and Milo. They have one battle like a skirmish. Then they have this big giant battle. They are both like leaping through the city and leaping over power lines, and when these people leap, they have this trail of the colors of their clothes and stuff, like an after image, or like that effect that photographers make, and I'm not sure how they make it or what exactly it's called, but it's kind of like an artifact and an after effect. And there's a lot of that. And then there's times when they're doing that, and then they slow, like to the Matrix bullet time for the shot. And yes, that stuff is cliche. And yes, those effects are over the top, and some of them aren't fully rendered great, probably because of the budgetary restraint. But their comics accurate too, but not the comics I'm talking about. I'm talking about the 1990s Morbius, where they gave him a different costume, an all black costume. Instead it's navy blue and red. And he's in this group called the Midnight Suns, and they're rendered in that, not in all their storylines, but some of them by the same art style that I cited earlier, the artists who went on to form Image Comics, Liefeld, McFarlane, all their clones. That invaded Marvel. It infested Marvel and consumed Marvel in the early 90s, And all these unlikely books. They even made like established artists like Herb Trimpe draw like that. How to draw like Liefeld. I'm like, huh? And so Morbius had the mega action back then, and he fought Spider-Man a bit, and those are over the top, And to me, so the action scenes are kind of like the '90s Morbius. So that's maybe I'm justifying it too much, but I'm cool with it because that's part of Morbius's history too. In the all black costume, he's always dressed in all black. He's always kind of like a goth in the movie, and when he finally starts wearing kind of like a black trench coat, and Morbius in the comics has got the wings that kind of come here, and they're red inside, and then his costume's like navy blue around here, and he's got a red collar. So in the movie, he ultimately ends up wearing like all black clothes, and he's got like kind of like a trench coat. And when it opens up, like when he's flying and stuff, the inner part instead of red is purple, which I thought was cool because red is expected. They also use the color red a lot in the lightings to where it's almost a little obvious, but I like it. Also, this is about as graphic as a PG-13 movie can get. They didn't pull punches really with the blood too much. They don't show a lot of blood, but like the brutality of the killings and stuff is very much there. And the makeup goes about as far as it can get into the horror terrain. Like I said, sometimes maybe it goes a little too far because the CGI is not 100%. I liked the energy of the movie, and we finally get to the big battle. It's because uh, Milo has beaten the shit out of Martine. And like Daredevil, I mentioned he has the sonar thing. And his ears, when they use the power, like these little folds come on their ears, like CGI. I thought that was kind of cool, which looked like a bat's, the ridges here. So like Daredevil, he like heard, he's focused in his sonar, he heard, Daredevil has the radar, and Morbius has the sonar. I'm sorry, it's kind of funny, but yeah, he hears Milo tormenting Martine and her need for help. He flies with the super speed and the trailing off colors and goes after. It was too late, and he finds Martine. And this I thought was a great scene. She's dying, and then she's like, she's bleeding kind of out, but he didn't really vampirize her. He just like mauled her and left her for dead. Um, Hopefully he didn't, molest her or anything, but I wouldn't be surprised when they're not trying to imply that. He's just a sleaze bag in the vampire Milo. So by this time, by the way, in working together to try to cure Morbius and find Milo, they have had a little romance develop. And she sticks by him. She's very loyal, and it's not overwrought. Like she blows off the police, like Simon and the guy, a buddy guy, and again, it knows when to stop when the particular desired effect is achieved. They don't linger over it, beat you over the fucking head with like a cudgel. Um, so as she's dying, she's like, "Don't let it be for nothing. You need this because he's losing. He's almost out of time with the synthetic blood. The amount of time it stays in his system. I mean, he can still steal some more, find some more, make some more. I don't know, whatever. But because he does steal some blood at some point, um, but then he'll have to vampirize somebody. So he holds her and she's dying. That's kind of romantic or whatever. And then he just, the game face comes on. He's like Morbius, the living vampire, and he just goes for it. He's brutally savages her neck. I mean, it's not a close-up graphic on her neck and blood spurting. If it was like Lucia Fulci, his fangs would pull back, and as it's pulling back, you pull back her uh, muscles and shit in her neck and nerves, and blood would just be just spurting like the arterial spray, like in Japanese horror movies and samurai movies. That would be pretty cool, but it's not an R-rated movie, and that's not really an exploitative scene. It's supposed to be more of a emotional scene or whatever. But if Lucia Fulci or Takashi Miike made it, even if it was a romantic emotional scene, they would still make it exploitive as fuck. But anyway, that's why we love those guys. So that was a good touch. I liked it. That her blood nourishes him and gives him the strength to kick Milo's fucking ass across New York or wherever they live, at this city, and whatever city they're in. I didn't catch that part. They were international water. They were in Greece. They were in international waters. Now they're in some big city. And so yeah, you know, they fight, and yeah, it's pretty, yeah. I mean, he ends up killing Milo, of course, and you know, that's it. He gets away. He flies off. Simon Stroud doesn't get to kill him or anything. Simon Stroud doesn't become his ally or sympathetic toward him either, like in the comic. But at first, he is a little sympathetic to me, like, this is, come on, turn yourself in. This isn't your thing. You can do the right thing. But that's when they first arrest him. But from the time he escapes on, um, yeah, the police can't catch up with him. So the whole buddy cop story kind of, just withers away eventually, and off into the night, and goes Morbius. And yeah, I dug it. There are two post-credit scenes, both involving an MCU character. Uh, now, I want to say this: there are some shots in the trailers, especially the early trailers, that are scenes that are not in this movie. That are alternate takes on some scenes or scenes that just don't exist. Like in the trailer, you have uh, Michael Keaton playing Adrian Toomes, the Vulture from Spider-Man Homecoming, and he's like, "Hey, Michael Morbius." Okay, so that never happens. The implication, I guess, is they meet up when Morbius is arrested. Totally changed. So they re-edited that, and that's one thing I think they were doing with this movie and the long delay. What was tinkering with it. So I have to say this: other than some of the dodgy CGI, to me, the movie had no false notes. It just plummeted along. It was I felt like it was the comics came to life. It had a good energy, the right balance of things. Now I know critics absolutely despise it already. So here we go with Henry with another incredibly unpopular opinion that nobody is going to like me talking, saying out loud, but here I am. And like I said, I have these videos called The Things That Need Be Said. If it was H.P. Lovecraft, it'd be like the things that must not be said. So the things that must not be said, I'm saying because they need to be said. Somebody's got to say. I loved Morbius. I thought it was awesome. But the post credit scenes were obviously some more last minute tinkering and like not sure what direction they wanted to go with, especially moving forward to if there's going to be more movies with this character. So what they did is they piggybacked off of Spider-Man No Way Home and Venom Let There Be Carnage, because there's a crossover in the credits of those, like uh, at the end of the Venom movie, which comes out first, he shifted into the MCU reality. And then at the end of No Way Home, he shifted back into his own alternate reality, which they've kind of strongly implied is the same reality as Morbius takes place in. There's like the Morbius Venom verse, and there's the MCU. So in this, it's kind of the opposite. The Vulture out in prison, Michael Keaton, Adrian Toomes, he gets shifted from the MCU into the Venom Morbius verse. So the Sony villain verse or whatever, where there's apparently no Spider-Man because he hasn't been meant because Venom wasn't familiar with him. So the Vulture's like, boom, I'm in this other place, and then that's the first post-credit scene and whatever. And then the last one, he's in full Vulture regalia. He's got the kind of helmet and the fur around his head, neck, and the giant wings. It looks really cool, and he gets Michael Morbius to meet him. Somehow he's found out about Michael Morbius. Michael Morbius appears. He's not game faced. He's just kind of Jared Leto, all black, long hair, and he's like, yeah, and he's like, hey man, I can't remember if he says I'm the Vulture, whatever. I forgot what he said. I'm Adrian Toomes. Anyway, he pops up and he says, hey, I want to make a deal with you, make an alliance, do some good in the world. And Morbius is like, intriguing. And that's the end. So that throws you with that. Is it going to be an anti-hero thing with Morbius? Is Morbius and the Vulture going to join up? Why would they join up? And Vulture does say to him, I was shifted from another universe. I think Spider-Man had something to do with it. Now, obviously, Morbius, most likely, like Venom, has no idea who Spider-Man is. So I don't know how they're going to get revenge on Spider-Man. I mean, Vulture, if there's no Spider-Man in that universe to get revenge on. Maybe they'll go after Venom. I think what they were trying to set up, I think because Spider-Man No Way Home came out way after Morbius was originally wrapped production-wise. So to me, the scene where these two scenes were filmed much later, and they're piggybacking off that concept, but using that concept to cross over these villains, just the way they did in Spider-Man No Way Home, bringing the Green Goblin, Dr. Octopus, Electro over to the MCU. So in this sense, now you've got a villain from the MCU, just like Venom teleported. The Venom's not exactly a villain in the movies, and he's into Venom and Morbius's like universe. So I think what they may have been shooting for is, okay, they're going to team up for whatever reason. Sorry about all the notifications and blips. And then they're going to probably team up with Venom, and then you're going to go toward the Sinister Six. And they're going to have a big Sinister Six movie with those six, and some of the characters know Spider-Man is, and some don't, and I'm not sure what brings them together. I mean, what good in the world is the Vulture talking about? He probably means bad in the world. I don't know. Are they going to make them all anti-heroes, or is the Vulture going to reform? I don't think that movie's ever going to come to be. I just don't see it. I think probably they planned that out with those three, and probably Kraven the Hunter, and I don't know who the other two would be, since they've got the definitive versions across universes in No Way Home. So I think No Way Home gave them a jumping off point at the last minute, but I don't think they really thought it through. Like, but wait, okay, we're hitting a wall here. We're running out of Spider-Man villains. Maybe the Scorpion would. Yeah, well, no, the Scorpion's in the MCU too. Matt Gargan, because he's in Homecoming. Yeah, I don't know, man, but I think that was lame. So the end credits sequences to me, I like Michael Keaton. I like the Vulture, the way they do him in the MCU, but they were lame. They were just so gratuitous to set up other stuff, and just not very well done. So forget those. And that was it, man. And I really liked the movie. There's also another little kind of few seconds of footage that was in the trailer that's not in the movie, where he stops this crook, at the at some supermarket or wherever. I think he like breaks his hand or something. Oh, he does. He breaks his fingers. Well, he breaks all the bones in his hand, and he lists the bones too because he's a doctor, right? And then the guy's like, "Who are you?" And he's like, and he gets his game face. He's like, "I'm Venom," and it's that's one of those throwaway like jokes that fall flat. Now in the trailer though, he says that, and then he goes, "Nah, man, I'm just kidding." I'm paraphrasing slightly, but Jared Leto's like, "Nah, man, just kidding. I'm your friendly neighborhood Michael Morbius, or your friendly doctor Michael Morbius," and yeah, it was kind of silly. So they cut that part out. They just said him say, "I'm Venom," and it's like, okay, so he's just fucking with the guy, and that's it. It wasn't very funny, but obviously Venom takes place in that reality because Simon Stroud and his buddy referenced some events in San Francisco that seem to point to the events in Venom, Let There Be Carnage. So that's it. I'm way over long, as I always do with Marvel movies, because I'm jam packing all the comic book stuff in. Of course, I had tons of anecdotes and personal shit. Sorry about that. It's not going to be an epic length like Shang-Chi, where my review was an hour and 40 minutes. And, Shang-Chi was like 2 hours and 20 minutes. So, when it's almost as long as the movie itself, nobody wants that. So on that note, I am going to exit. My final verdict is I loved Morbius. It's going to be kind of a cult movie, I think. It's considered a flop, but this is how I led this thing off. It was made for 75 million. So far, it's made 105 million domestically. I don't know about worldwide, maybe not a lot, but the point is, it's made back its investment. Now, to really be profitable nowadays, movies, they're like, you need to be double the budget because there's also advertising costs and all this stuff. So okay, if it makes 150 million or more worldwide, then it will be a hit, but it definitely won't be a flop. It may be profitable. So that again, that's the hyperbolic view people have of things, because it didn't, like, it dropped by 83% in the second week, and that's like all over the damn. I go onto Google, and that's all the Google news is like Morbius, biggest drop in film history, and Morbius is trash. Fuck Morbius. They don't really say that, but that's what I'm getting. All the clickbait sites and the mainstream bullshit movie review sites. Morbius is trash. Don't go see it. It's a piece of shit. It flopped. It's a failure. It lost money. It's hemorrhaging money for Sony and Marvel, which is not. It's making money for them. It's an embarrassment to Marvel. I'll let you guys decide that latter part, but it's not a flop. I just want to say that because that was kind of how I started this thing. It's not really a hit yet. May never be a hit, but it's not a flop. So anyway, thanks a lot. That's my new BLU review, and next time I probably will be doing a review of the movie I saw the same day as Morbius, Everything Everywhere All at Once by the Daneils with Michelle Yeoh, and yeah, it was interesting. So that'll be a pretty cool review, I hope. Yeah, I have a lot to say about that one too, but of course from a different whole angle as this. So thanks for watching. I want to thank Tim Tolbert, our permanent channel patron and collaborator, for purchasing my movie tickets to see this double feature. Now, I'm going to be in the interest of full disclosure. Money doesn't go very far these days. So the money that Tim Tolbert PayPal'd me, I used, and I went to see Everything Everywhere All at Once, and I had to take an Uber there because there was only one showing of that movie. Well, two. One at 7 p.m., one at 10 p.m., but one night, the last Thursday. And those were the only showings at that one theater that one night in the Carolinas, and that's all there's going to be. So it's kind of like very limited the way, like when I saw the house that Jack built or Mandy, just like at least in this part of neck of the woods, I guess they just don't feel like they can do the engagements. Now where Tim lives, I think it's on its second week and it's still playing. But I still think he needs to rush and see it before it goes away because I don't know. But anyway, so I wanted to thank Tim. But what I was going to say is, after getting the Uber and getting something to drink, I really didn't have any money left over. So I'm like, I don't know when I'm going to be able to see Morbius, and I don't want to ask him to pay for Morbius, and then I'm going to have to make another trip and work it in. Well, I just decided to do things the old-fashioned way. I sneaked into a showing of Morbius. I went through the little app where it shows you the seating of it, and it just happened to be the last one was like 10 minutes after Everything Everywhere All at Once ended, and it just happened to be in the theater like across the hall from me, and it had no seats bought at all. So I just walked up to the balcony, my favorite seat, which is usually like G5 to G8. G8, that's a pulp hero. And that's it. I think one person was in the theater besides me to see Morbius. And I don't know if that person paid or not. It doesn't matter. So yeah, I took advantage of the situation. I've done that before in similar scenarios, but this one I'm like, I can justify it because I didn't want to put out Tim, and I wanted to see Morbius, and I wanted to be able to review it for you guys. So I didn't pay for a ticket to see Morbius, and neither did my patron. We are bad people because Morbius, there you go. We're contributing to it, hemorrhaging money and flopping. All right. So anyway, I love you guys, and I'll talk to you soon. Don't know when, but thanks for everything.